this is Elisa with averageadvocate.com, and I empower everyday people to make a difference in the world. I'm restarting this video because halfway through my last one, the fire alarm went off, which was, you guys could probably hear, but in addition, that's not good. And actually there was a problem, so it's probably good that the fire alarm went off. So now that I've taken care of the fire alarm business, I'm going to go back to answering the question, what is the difference between an advocate and an activist? So, so for many years, when I named my blog Average Advocate many years ago, since then it's been called Average Avocado, Average Activist, and that wasn't really my intent when I named it Average Advocate. I thought that everybody associated with the term advocate because it means essentially to care about something enough to care about it, to act on it, to push it forward to a degree. And it turned out I was wrong. Not everybody associates, understands the word advocate or associates themselves as an advocate, because a lot of times that term is just used in politics or legal proceedings, or, advocacy, like calling your representatives, which it is, that is advocacy, but that is not all that advocacy encompasses. Advocacy can be the mom who's calling the school because her kid needs an IEP for their special education. Or it could mean realizing that somebody in your neighborhood isn't actually being treated fairly. So they maybe go to the town hall, or maybe they write a letter to their HOA, or maybe they just are like in a group of friends, with the whole anti-racist movement. A lot of people are like, hey, racist jokes are not okay. That's advocacy. That is not actually, it doesn't have to be a huge, massive thing. Advocacy is just everyday action that comes out and can come out. And that's how I define an average advocate. Is an average advocate is somebody who cares enough about something that it kind of comes out of them externally. And that could be just in conversations. It could be in their actions. And I talk a lot about this more in the 5 phases of rising up, which you can grab on my website for free. And it walks you through those different 5 stages and helps you figure out where you're at in that. However, that's not exactly the same thing as an activist. Now, an activist can actually, all activists are actually advocates because they are pushing something forward and they care about something also. Therefore, they are also advocates. However, not all advocates would relate to the term activist. Activist usually means that they're a lot more loud and big and outspoken and doing more extreme, even if it's not extreme, but loud, extreme actions to oppose a cause or support a cause in a very external way. Now, I think most of us probably in some way or another are activists about something, but we don't really use that term because we're not necessarily thinking of ourselves as an activist. For example, a lot of people have very strong religious beliefs, myself including, and I wouldn't call myself an activist over my faith in the things that I believe about Jesus. Some people might call that fundamentalism. However, most of us aren't going to use the term activists about that, but I have beliefs, deep-seated beliefs that I believe are true, and I would be outspoken about them if anybody asked me about them. Therefore, I would be an activist, or I might talk about them even without being asked about them, which is more akin to being an activist. However, usually the reason why we tend to kind of not so sure about the word activist, or why we're like, I don't know if I like that, or what I see the reason most people don't like that is because at some point or another, all of us have been on one side of being an activist of a cause that we were not in favor of. So it's interesting. There's this petition site a long time ago. It's called change.org or something like that. It probably still exists. And you'd see all these petitions and it was like, yeah, you can change the world. You can make a difference. And on it is like these lists of petitions in different topics that people are activists about or advocates about. And they're all like, a lot of them are opposing each other. And you're like, that's kind of interesting, because the idea with being an activist is you strongly believe in something so much that you're opposing something else. And I think a lot of times with advocacy, you're not necessarily, sometimes you might be opposing something else, but a lot of times you're not. You're just like, hey, like when my son was starting to go through some speech difficulties. I was making all these calls in the area, and I realized like the services. I was like, hey, if I didn't speak English very well, if I was an immigrant, if I was impoverished, there's no way I would have found these services that were available to me. And so I was like calling around trying to figure it out. I'm like, I'm a white middle class woman, and I am struggling figuring this out. And so for me, it was this awareness that this is going to be really difficult for anybody, because if I'm having difficulty with it and I have access to technology and different resources that are helping me figure out these things, if I'm having struggling with this, then I know that other people are going to be struggling with this that don't have access to the same things. And this is supposedly a free resource for them. So in that case, I ended up being an advocate for something that mattered, but it wasn't really something that there was like an opposing side to it. Like when I brought it up in conversation, which is, again, the idea of an average advocate, doesn't mean I'm necessarily writing government officials or anything like that. It just means I'm doing something about it. And so in my conversations with the people who are providing the services, I was like, hey, this isn't really accessible. Are there ways that we can make it more accessible? And they're like, oh, I didn't even think of it from that perspective. That's a great point. And, and started making slow changes to make it slightly more accessible, those services to people. So that there was no opposing force to that. People aren't like, hey, I'm against you giving services to kids who have speech delays. Like, there was none of that. And therefore, that would be most of us feel a little bit more comfortable in that realm, which is called advocacy. And pretty much all of us have done it at some point in our life, whether we're mama bear on the playground or whether it's something a little bit more in depth where we're like, hey, this rent issue is not working for these people. We need somebody to stand up and help them, like in those, or like I referred to earlier, that conversation like about racism and when you're at a barbecue, like those types of things is everyday advocacy. That is when we care about something enough that it kind of comes out of us and it kind of bubbles out of us. Whereas it's interesting because with activism, there's usually that opposing force that is very strong. However, once you decide you're an activist on an issue, you become an activist on that issue, and then you don't normally care that much about the term. So like for myself, like probably my first big realm into activism was doing the anti-trafficking stuff. And by doing that and by getting involved in that with, before Blackout Trafficking, which is the anti-trafficking organization that I'm currently CEO of and founded. But before that one, there was another one that I started outside of DC, and we were like talking to people, trying to figure it out, research the area. And in doing so, I became an activist. I was advocating already, but I became an activist because I was like, this is wrong. And people don't realize it. And I can actually do something about it. And oh my gosh, I just talked with this judge and the laws are changing now. Like, and for me, that was like this huge awareness to being like, okay, maybe not all activism is, maybe why do I have this negative taste in my mouth against activism? But on the other hand, now I understand that too, because there are many times where I'm like, ugh, I wish you weren't talking to me like that. And I realize it's because they're activists on a different side of an opposing issue for me. So anyways, it's interesting because these terms kind of get crisscrossed a little bit. But at some point, people who are activists usually become proud of it because it's become part of their identity and who they are. So if you ask me, I'm like, yeah, I'm an activist against human trafficking. Of course I am. I mean, that's a part of what I spend a ton of my days doing and what I care about a lot. And I advocate a lot for people to be free, because I believe that people deserve a chance to be free. Or in the same way, right now, there's a lot of stuff going on in refugee resettlement in the United States, which is legal openings for people to come in who are usually in extreme suffering or have, war or persecution or whatever that is making them at high risk of death. And so there's this legal process that they go through. And right now it got completely jammed up in the last few years. And the Biden administration said they were going to open it and they haven't. And so there's been a lot of back and forth about that. And before I would be like, yeah, I'm an advocate. I care about the issue of refugees that are right, like 30 minutes away from me, and they're really struggling, and I know what's going on because I'm supporting anti-trafficking organizations that are helping them, and I've seen it, and in that moment, and at some point I'm like, actually, I guess you could call me an activist, because if I wouldn't back down on this is something that there's, there might be two opposing forces, and therefore that's usually when we call it activism. So anyways, I hope that answers some of your questions about advocacy and activism and how I define an everyday person being an advocate. And what I'm really curious about is to hear what issues you care about and what things that are important to you, because I know that we might not all agree on the same things that are important, or we might not all agree on the same things that that is worth our time to be advocates on. But what I'm calling you into is just to rise up and to start considering how you can make a difference in the world. And that's what I give you tools to do. And you could go to my website, and first thing you should be able to find is the 5 phases of rising up, which helps you walk through what stage you're in as you figure out where you are in this journey and the next best step you can take to make a difference in the world. And that's what I'm about empowering you to do, because I believe that there's something that you are meant to do, and you're meant to do it fully alive. And yeah, so that's it. And there's a kid knocking on my door, so I'm going to go address that. And I hope you have a lovely day. And if you have any other questions for me to answer in these daily justice videos, which I don't actually do daily yet, just send them to me, DM them to me, because I'm always curious what people's questions are. All right, bye.